right. You were my introduction to Rene Girard, so thank you for that. And I've read I See Satan Fall Like Lightning since then, and done some writing on it on my own. But you've thrown another name out there recently, Ray Peat. What can you tell me in we'll start general and then work to specific. What can you tell me in a nutshell about Ray Peat's work and what it means to you and why you're interested in it?
Well, he was a avant-garde kind of physiologist, biologist in training. He was a philosopher. I would
Hmm.
say he would be more like an anarcho mutualist or something,
Okay.
and um, he was someone who kind of saw his work in biology and particularly in the world of human nutrition, particularly with an emphasis on women's nutrition as part of this overarching vision to radically change the world politically. So much
Okay.
of his work is centered around taking inexpensive staple food items in America, at least, and using them as medicine or as nutrition
Hmm.
to increase people's metabolic function. The dominant medical paradigm by which the West is kind of enthralled is one that is focused on genetics as the primary means of understanding disease and illness.
Hmm.
And whereas, a lot of the, metabolic paradigm of medicine is something that is completely overlooked. And mitochondria, which are the little power plants, the little batteries of our cells.
Hmm.
Mitochondrial health is kind of the next, chapter of where we will all be heading in terms of popular understanding of what is the source of disease. Whereas the kind of establishment dogma of medicine is all about, again, if you've got a disease, it must be something genetics driven in your family history, and it's
Ah.
nothing you can really do. And what Ray said was that Dr. Ray Peat said that that was learned helplessness that's
Hmm.
at play
Okay.
there, where we believe all these diseases that people have, or suicidal ideation or depression or other types of mental illnesses, all of these things are downstream from metabolic dysfunction, from the environmental toxins and the environmental kind of traumatic brainwashing that goes on in our society. All
Okay.
of
So
these things are conspiring together to kind of hold people back from optimizing their brain, their mind, their hope, their
okay.
ambitions, their ability to organize and create meaningful change. And so he was taking a kind of political vision and starting nutrition as its kind of launch point to make things move faster.
Okay. So that's let's follow up a little on that. You mentioned he wanted to take some staple foods in America and introduce them to people as ways to make themselves more resilient or fight disease. Give me a real easy example that people would be very familiar with. A food that we all know about that Ray Peat found, if it's consumed properly, can help people's health.
Yeah, so he was all about, for example, instead of eating lots of the muscle meats with the muscle meats with that were traditionally prizing in recent years, he was
Hmm.
always emphasizing, gelatinous cuts of meat, beef shank, uh,
Oh, okay.
uh, meats that are typically considered to be not as high value, but actually have more gelatin in them. And he was all about, making sure that in order to be able to optimize your use of the traditional amino acids that are found in muscle meat, you needed to also have a nice assortment of gelatin and collagen from the broths of soups, from the connective tissues, and those aforementioned cuts of meat, also using gelatin powder even to make jello or gelatin with different fruit juices. So big about using gelatin and collagen for anti-aging properties, for all kinds of holistic metabolic improvement. Another one that he was big into is using the carrot, the ordinary American carrot, and
Oh,
slicing it vertically, allowing it to be used as a kind, and then putting a little coconut oil, putting a little bit of maybe a little vinegar, and making a simple carrot salad that is good for scrubbing the intestine of excess endotoxin, which is these kind of toxic byproducts from eating things like industrial seed oils and what are called polyunsaturated fatty acids or PUFAs.
okay.
And this is something that a carrot salad has taken on very successfully on TikTok and other places where people spread healthy, cheap tips to stay healthy. A lot of women have gotten on board with removing excess estrogen and serotonin related issues can be addressed by just eating one carrot a day, in a kind of salad form, or just eating the carrot if that's all you've got time for. Has antimicrobial, antibacterial properties, which is the insoluble fiber is very effective for being able to scrub the intestine again of those excess endotoxins that are built up from eating industrial, foods and all the adulterated foods we're in. All these things you can think of as like little psyops, psychological operations, whether intended or not, to
Mhm.
creating a dumbed down, low energy population that's incapable of being able to rise up against the elites. And so I look at those things as he's onto something very good with these basic principles. Again, he's very pro saturated fat. So he was very early on before everybody figured out that coconut oil was healthy for you. It's really rich in saturated fat.
Oh,
Everybody
wow. Okay.
demonized saturated fat and butter and beef tallow, of course, for decades, blaming it for the problems of heart disease, which in fact, it was actually the seed oils, the industrial seed oils, which were driving a lot of the heart disease problems and still do because
Yes.
they're extremely inflammatory and not fit for human consumption. But they've pilloried and attacked the saturated fats. And Ray was early on before the internet really got on board the coconut oil thing, talking about the amazing health properties of saturated fat like coconut oil. He
Hmm.
also talks about using little simple foods like white button mushrooms have really good anti-estrogenic and toxin effects when you have them very well cooked and you eat them just however way you want to prepare them at that point. Saute them with butter or whatever you want to do, coconut oil, or put it in a dish with soup with beef gelatin, and you're going to get so many nice anti-aging properties. And everything he's really focused on is getting your hormones in balance and getting your thyroid function up. A lot of your thyroid problems are what's driving the mental illness. I know that
Hmm.
you don't like statism. And I
No.
would say that the level of statism that we have today is a downstream effect of low thyroid in mass.
Okay. That may explain it. I have noticed a change in I'm a Gen Xer, so I've been around long enough to maybe see some societal trends, and I have noticed um as government and technology get more intrusive into more areas of people's lives, that people just kind of go along with it because there's always they're dangling another type of carrot in front of you, right? There's they get you to fall for surveillance by giving you new electronic toys,
Yeah,
and they get you to go along with more government surveillance and regulation by giving you promising you a different kind of financial credit
yeah,
and things. So I see some of that as well. Now you're drawing the connection, and I think Ray Peat is also, as you describe it, between some of our mental emotional health and just your basic physical nutrition. Am
yeah,
I correct in understanding that?
yeah. Another sacred cow that he was keen to challenge is the notion that sugar is bad for you. Okay, so
Okay.
even within the alternative world, the primal world, the paleo world, the keto and carnivore world, low carb world, all those different worlds, or just traditional low calorie type diet
Hmm.
thinking, sugar is considered a villain. Ray Peat was again kind of going against the grain by looking at a lot of the literature that suggests that sugar is actually vital and necessary for a high thyroid functioning body. And
Okay.
it's actually, in his view, running on fat primarily as your primary fuel and severely reducing carbohydrate intake, particularly fruit and simple sugars, was something that would be a recipe for chronic cortisol, which would impair
Okay.
your thyroid function. So you might have relatively high thyroid, but it's getting redirected into stress hormones like cortisol and so forth when you are chronically deficient in your glucose consumption. And so he was all about fruit, primarily orange juice, again, basic staples. He would say, watch out if you're going to eat a lot of starchy fruits, you need to cook them well to break down the starches so that they're not fodder for endotoxin buildup in the gut again, which will then redirect some of the things you are doing to improve your thyroid back into the stress mechanism.
Okay. Now,
So
when
you
you
can,
say sugar, a lot of people may think of refined sugars, added sugars to things, but you're mentioning more specifically the sugars that occur naturally in some whole foods. Does
yeah.
Ray Peat draw a distinction between those, or is all sugar just the same?
Well, some people can't handle table sugar, but he was not against table sugar, which again
Hmm.
is a big anti groupthink, anti what you would consider the conventional view of things, even within the alternative, nutritional world. So even for him, if you can't, he's not, which is refreshing, what's so refreshing, his basic staples of his diet are things like milk, orange juice, low, gelatinous cuts of meat that have lots of gelatin in them, or if you don't
Hmm.
eat that, you get your gelatin in through powder form or whatever, make your gelatin dessert like people used to eat all the time in the 50s and 60s. You go to those
Yeah,
little
yeah. There's
cat
always room, right? Was that the
yeah,
old slogan?
yeah. Did you ever go to those cafeterias? I mean, they used to have them when I was a kid, those little cafeterias where you get your tray and you pick out your meat or your fish,
Yes.
and then
Yes,
you
yes.
pick out your jello. Remember that?
Yep, yep. I
Yeah.
do. Yeah, the standard. I'm a product of the government model schools. Unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately. I was fortunate to get through childhood and then unlearn a lot of stuff
Yeah.
popular nutrition, which isn't very nutritious, it turns out.
Yeah.
Ray Peat. It sounds like he's a person who understands very deeply what goes on nutritionally rather than just on the surface of um, technocracy. Like you mentioned before, a lot of our medical complex now is focused on genetics. Is that only the genetics of the patient, or is it focused on pathogens and what's out in the world that can infect us?
All of it. All of it.
All of
Yeah.
it. Okay.
It all kind of goes together. This, we could call it a mother of all psyops,
Hmm.
which is this entropy dominated way of looking at the world and our bodies and earth and everything in it, which is this idea that everything is bound to decay and fall apart. Well, I think even Christians have bought into this psyop and have built it into their theology, unfortunately, where they think that
Yes.
it's the apocalypse anytime around the corner, it's about to show up, everything's going to fall apart. And that mindset is permeating all throughout our society in various different ways, that everything tends towards decay and chaos and falling apart. Whereas Christianity doesn't say that. And Christianity says, behold, I make all things new. Okay. That's the,
Hmm.
the driving animus behind reality in the universe itself. And creation is groaning for its redemption. So there is a tension of decay, but the decay is being defeated by Christ through history on the atomic level, as well as everything else, all the way up and all the way down below the atomic level, all the way up to social functioning, and I think that we would do well to take all things captive and our a view of, what does the Christian do to renew his mind, heart, body, and soul, and to love God with our heart, mind, and soul, and to love our neighbor in the same as we love ourselves. And if you love yourself, you'll take care of your body and you won't live by
Sure.
lies and eat seed oils if you know better, right? And on a daily basis, right? Because if you do that when you're 20, it's okay. When you're 40, okay, now it's going to build up. When you're 60,
Yes.
ooh, it's getting really bad.
Yeah.
And so you have to really take captive of what you're doing and be aware of the ways in which evil through ignorance or malpractice or intention is really harming the abundant joy that we have. It is within our means to be able to have the revolutionary, beautiful Renaissance that we've always dreamed of in our lifetimes. We don't have to settle to say, well, that'll be one day over the rainbow 100 years from now. That's learned helplessness, Ray would say.
Hmm.
And I would say that's not the view of the Christian. The view of the Christian is that we are not settling in for entropy and just trying to make the best of it while we all fall apart. The role of the Christian is that the kingdom of heaven is coming now, and that the resurrection was the first fruit of something that is being manifested throughout history through Jesus's body, bringing about, this radical rejection of the bondage to decay. Remember what Paul says, that creation is looking for the sons of God to be revealed to set it free from its captivity to decay or its
Hmm.
bondage to decay. And, too many times the Christians, again, because so much of, I would say, Platonism or Gnosticism or dualism, all these, they're all kind of, they look to me like they're on a spectrum to me around the same general direction. But, all of those things are really kind of directing us in a wrong direction in terms of our perspective.
So the gospel that you've brought into this now, Rene Girard, he seemed to have been well versed enough in Christianity, at least later in his life when he made the anthropological discoveries that he did. How about Ray Peat? Is this you sort of interpreting Ray Peat's work in light of what you know about the gospel, or what do you know about Ray Peat and perhaps his traditional beliefs, if he has some, and if they informed his work?
Well, he wasn't a person who was religious, but he was someone who had studied the church to some degree, particularly
Mhm.
the Eastern Orthodox Church. But
Okay.
I would say that he wasn't someone who would call themselves a conventional Christian or,
Mm.
theist like that. But he was someone who absolutely held high esteem towards Christian values and kind of ethics and aesthetics. And I think that his biological theory fits like a glove with what I'm learning from anthropology and learning from physics. And I see this as reclaiming every domain of knowledge back under the headship of the Christian worldview, not to just put a religious stamp on everything, but rather to just see how it all fits together, right? So,
Yeah, Christianity can be so it's almost a deep Christianity is the ultimate polymath,
yeah.
right? It should be able to inform just about everything we do in our lives. Tell me about a phrase you've used before, gospel technology. I don't know that people would throw those two words together. 'Cause when they think of the gospels, they think of something ancient, sort of before there was a lot of what we would call
Yeah.
technology today. So, what do you mean by gospel technology, and does it tie in at all with some of the figures that you've helped people get introduced to?
Well, think about like with Rene Girard. You read the book "I See Satan Fall Like Lightning,"
Yes.
and not to put you on the spot, but did you kind of get a general gist of what I might be getting at with the gospel technology, or did it because he doesn't use that term, I know, or
No, he
whatever, but
doesn't.
did you kind of see how it kind of naturally flows kind of from some of the foundational stuff he does there?
The sense I got was that he identified some very core points of departures between the gospel and the other mythology that is not only ancient but still hanging around today. And he did not use the term technology, so it did not resonate with me to call it technology.
Right.
But is that what you mean by gospel technology? You
Yeah,
mean that there's
technology in the
something
sense
new
of,
and innovative?
yeah, technology doesn't have to be what, we think of an iPhone. It can be something
Okay.
that allows us to see things differently in a way
Ah,
that it moves things forward, right? So if you
okay.
think about like what's happening when you have a story of let me give an example. I call the gospel technology a media technology, right? So when you think about
Hmm.
how was the story of Jesus's passion like recorded? It was recorded through, these texts, right? Or people were writing down. Sometimes it was oral, and then it was written down into a text and
Hmm.
shared around and orally performed in front of a small group. That's what that media technology that transmitted the gospel looked like, right? It
Okay.
was people who were eyewitnesses passing down what they saw of what was happening to a man named Jesus when he was wrongly persecuted by a crowd that was filled with envy and fear and
Hmm.
jealousy and self-righteousness and just madness from the mob. And Rene Girard says that they lost their minds. And that's what
Hmm.
humans have always done in a group. And we need to be very suspicious of crowds, generally speaking, because they get caught up in fervors, both good or bad. And when they go bad, it's hard to turn it back good. And so the Bible allows us to get out of the madness of crowds and think for ourselves and have the courage to take up our cross, meaning take the position of the human person who may be isolated from the crowd, like Jesus was in his
Hmm.
crucifixion. And so
Yes.
when you report events in history in a similar form, using media technology available to you at that time, whether you're doing an oral eyewitness report. Let's say you are in a remote village in the Congo, and you see some group of people ganging up on a person and beating them relentlessly, but you've been exposed to the Bible, so there's a certain way of doing things that's illuminated by the example provided for us about what Jesus encountered in his own life. And so
Yes.
you get away from that maddening crowd. You run to a local village of people who are also exposed to the gospel, and you say, listen, I just see our friend Bob is being viciously attacked. He's
Hmm.
about to be killed over nothing. They're jealous because he's got nicer animals than they do, and they were trying to steal it, and he said no way, and they're just torturing him right now. We've got to stop this. Let's get the police. You've performed a gospel type of technology if you did an oral report. If you had it on a cell phone, then you took a cell phone video of it, you sent it to the police authority. They say, oh my goodness, let's get over there right now and stop this. uh Now, if an event like that becomes a lightning rod by
Hmm.
which people say, hey, we're not going to allow these corrupt gang that runs this region to go on doing this to people. And here's why. And the video circulates all over social media. That is gospel technology. That's maybe that gang was kind of popular or something, but now they see the brutality unmasked in their collective persecution of a person. And now their popularity is being cracked. Their credibility is being cracked. If they're a gospel infected society, if they're
Hmm.
a gospel abandoning society or gospel not quite fluent society, it may not, such video depictions of a group of gangsters beating up a guy may not go over very well in a compelling way towards the person being persecuted. But where you have a Christ saturated, Christ haunted, meaning the biblical text has been disseminated for some time and it's been catching on amongst the communities. It's
Hmm.
been catching on institutionally, how crime is reported and crime laws are written, how contract laws are being enforced. All of those things are built upon uh, the effects of the biblical worldview encountering a society and kind of putting its infection into it for good. All of that becomes this opportunity for gospel technology to open people's minds to the ways in which uh, they need to rethink certain behaviors in society as or certain groups or certain rituals or certain whatever as okay, right? Like for example, Dominic, if we were to
Hmm.
see a major media outlet, let's say Elon Musk used his platform with his 100 million followers on Twitter, and he showed a video of a raw milk farmer like Amos, what's his name?
Amos
Miller.
Miller. Is
Amos
it Amos
Miller.
Miller?
I don't
There
know
you
if there's
go.
any video of this, but if there was, of him being arrested and his milk being thrown
Hmm.
out. And let's say it was really like good film quality. So you really got a good look. It's not blurry. You can clearly see the emotions on his face. You can see the emotions on his family. And let's say Elon got really excited about that. And he said, I'm just going to start hitting this video up. He's using gospel technology to change the collective's mind about a ritual called raw milk law. And they're watching that ritual actually being enforced in a physical, enacted way. It's no longer just a abstract law on a book. It's being an excuse to do coercive violence on a group against an individual. And
Sure.
then if he disseminates that video and Robert Kennedy sends it and Trump gets onto it, or all the libertarians start spreading it, before you know it, you can create such a sea change emotionally and ethically and so forth that people will have them enough momentum to start really repealing any of these laws that are being used to harm people for selling farm foods, right? So that's what gospel technology means in the way in which I use it. And not
Okay.
to belabor the point, but just to add another layer to it, it's not only just transmitting, the truth using technology to give truth to the victim, and give people a different ability to see things differently, but it's also, you can think of it in the art form of as well, like people making movies, fiction or nonfiction, that similarly move people to wrestle with the way in which we persecute one another, or the way in which we follow mimetic blindness into destructive patterns that harm people.
Okay. So is the in your description of it and that understanding of it, is the gospel substance itself a type of technology in the sense that it's a new way of
Yeah,
looking at things? It's not just the fact that somebody manages to communicate something to other people and get them to be interested in it. It's what's being communicated. Do you see the gospel message itself as the as a mark of innovation and a mark of departure for good from what had preceded it?
I guess in some way you could say there is something new happening. I wouldn't reduce it only to a technology in and of itself of, when
Sure.
Jesus is being nailed. I wouldn't say, okay, this is just technology, but it is in the sense of, this is the first time in which, depends on how you want to look at it. This is an innovation in the sense that this is the first time one of our human sacrificial rituals actually tried to feed God himself into it, that's something new, right? And that's
Yeah,
going to pop out a different result, right?
sure. And
Yeah,
the fact that people took the side of enough people seem to take the side of the victim, that brings in a little of what I understand from Girard, is that
right,
this was really um such a different if you just looked at the recipe, it looked like a standard old scapegoating or sacrifice goat. Um, the killing of Jesus as he's a malcontent. He's disrupting the order, the social order that we're imposing. But there was enough of a reaction against it. There were enough different ingredients, if you dug deeply enough, that this in a sense changed the world.
right.
Do I understand the Girard
Yeah,
perspective there correctly? I mean,
yeah,
that's my perspective,
yeah,
but
it's certainly, I think it's performance. I think Jesus was a performance artist, you know?
he was a lot of things, right?
Yeah, he was a performance artist, and he wasn't a book guru. He didn't sit around and write books,
Hmm.
but he was a performance artist,
Hmm.
which means his life was action, and it had an art, and it was art. Everything he did, everything he said was revealing, the truth in unexpected ways. And I would say that what happens with the cross is that it has a destructive technology to it as well, in the sense that it has this ability to tear down the veil. The veil is torn in the temple, and
Hmm.
there's a kind of tearing action taking place in the aftermath math of not only the cross, but the completion of the cross when the resurrection happens. And I always thought it's interesting. I've really thought about this a lot, so I'll share it with you. That
Sure.
why didn't Jesus get on CNN when he did his resurrection? In other words, why did well they wouldn't have covered it fairly anyways. But I mean, the point I'm using it metaphorically.
Sure, sure.
Why didn't Jesus resurrect right in the Roman Forum, right in front of the town square of the Roman Empire? Why didn't he make sure, if this was such a big calling card of his credibility, why didn't he put more of an effort to make it harder? I mean, to make it easier for us all to, kind of validate. Yeah, that was a really good shot. That really happened, and therefore, man, he really is who he said he was.
Hmm.
Why did he make that easier? And I thought about it, and it's like, well, it makes sense. I mean, it tells you the nature of his character and the nature of the God that he represents, right? Which is that, if he did it the easy way, you'd believe him for the wrong reasons.
Ah, right. That exactly.
You'd
It,
believe him for the wrong reason, right?
sure.
Instead of so he does his resurrection privately that only believers see. And it's transmitted through the church, the believers, right? The church
Hmm.
passed down that resurrection kind of eyewitness fervor through the ages in a unchained, in a unbroken chain.
Hmm.
And I just think that's interesting to think of it that way. That you know, this is something that he didn't do on the public stage, because then people would say, okay, that guy's God, in a kind of pagan way,
Yes.
rather
Hmm.
than in a truly Christ changed way,
Hmm.
because they say, who's going to argue with the guy who's got that kind of power? Well, of course, whatever he says, Jesus says, forgive your enemies. Okay, I guess I'll forgive my enemies, but you're not really owning it. The only way you can own it is to encounter the resurrection through the actions of others who have been inspired by it down through the ages. And
Ah,
in that kind of private affair that the resurrection, yes, he was appeared before a bunch of people, but it seemed to be always in front of people who are already believers. And
okay. People who are ready for the message.
yeah, and
Okay.
he didn't do it in the public square, because again, I think people would be converting in a Herculean way, like, wow, okay,
Mhm.
you're the big boss because you could do something that we can never do. So that's a might makes right gesture, which is unbecoming
Yes.
of the aesthetic that Jesus embodied.
Oh, that statism that you used before, describing what I'm averse to very accurately. Yes.
Yeah.
So
But that's
now I have another question for you. I'm sorry. Go ahead. It looked like sounded like you were going to say
oh, I
something.
just wanted to finish up your question, because you asked good questions. So it makes me
Okay.
think, more things to say about it.
Sure,
Because,
sure.
you think about um, it's a technology part of it. And this is something that I love about Girard's work,
Mhm.
that is so under, man, we need to get the word out. That's why I'm glad you're putting the word out there in your blog and everything,
Hmm.
and
Thank you.
your work, because we need everybody hands on deck. And I appreciate you doing what you did. I you and I talked, we were talking about, the ethics of Christ, and
Hmm.
we shared similar conclusions. And then I was telling you, there's this other layer to it that would just enrich some of these ethical conclusions that you've already come to by way of anarchistic philosophy submitted to Christianity in the gospel, right?
Yes.
And the anthropology just enriches it like this fine, fine sauce or food cuisine. It's just wow, it's so much better. You get the picture more and more filled out, and it's only scratching the surface. All this is, but it's so fun when you dive into this. But okay, so the resurrection is a disruptive technology, and its transmission of through oral transmission and eyewitness reports,
Hmm.
insofar as myth binds nations together and binds culture together, and is kind of ethereal. And the eyewitness reports of resurrection are not ethereal. He's eating breakfast, he's being touched, he's
Yes.
he's it's embodied. It's not this weird, kind of psychedelic language like you might see something close to that in pagan resurrection myths about Horus or whatever. It's really down to earth, gritty. We were in this place, and we had breakfast with him, and we talked to him, and so forth. and so it's not like mythic resurrections in that in the textual way in which it's transmitted, and it's also
Mm.
not in line with mythology in the sense that it creates division, wherein mythology creates unity, right? So when you're killing a scapegoat, uh, yeah, when your community is united against one, if they're polarized in one direction to destroy someone, and they really truly believe they're Nazi because they went to Madison Square Garden, yeah, when they're really truly convinced of that. But of course, it would take more than 50% of society to believe that, right? And that's thanks be to Jesus that we can't get 100%, right?
Right. Yes.
Uh, but because we don't have that unanimity, we have this kind of disruption, right? Where we have people not able to, they're not able to create unity anymore. They're broken. They're schism. They have schism. They have division because nobody can agree on who the monster truly is. Nobody can
Mm.
agree on who the real villain is. Everybody has a little bit of questioning, a little bit of doubt, a little bit of distance from the deep held belief that this person deserves to be destroyed. And so that is what allows schism to take place. And historically, we see that bearing out when, the Christian, the early way movement, which is the early Christians, are willing to break away from the overall community that they're in at that time,
Mhm.
and really suffer a lot of social alienation on account of them bearing witness to what they saw. So, in other words, myth created unity based on everybody agreeing to the lie that that person deserved to be destroyed, and therefore, you know, hundreds of years after, it gets told as a myth that this is Horus and it's going into the underground and it's coming out. In reality, it was a real victim, but it gets etherealized, it gets mystified into this kind of language that we see in mythology about dying and rising gods. You don't see that with the real resurrection. You see gritty reports, realism, you see division and disunity on
Mhm.
account of how upsetting to the hierarchy the resurrection report is.
Yes. Now, you mentioned the grittiness there, and how this was transmitted from eyewitnesses. It seems to me that uh, we have a very literate society. We read everything. Everything is text messages, emails, um, scrolling through news feeds. Sometimes there's video, but there's always text accompanying things. And it's a very remote um, culture, the way we learn now and the way we disseminate information and the way we receive. But it strikes me, and I hear some of this in your explanation, that the first form of the gospel is lived. And then the second form of the gospel is preached in encounter, where you can actually interact with a person. It's only really the third form of the gospel where it gets recorded into fixed medium that can then be sent around without the person who put it into that form even being uh, proximate
Yeah,
to anyone. Do we lose something by not do we lose something by being so literate and remote
yeah,
focused that we lack some of the lived and the encountered forms of just human communication, which is where the gospel thrives?
yeah, yeah. I think so. We have that. We have that. The I think that's one of the things that some of the effects of the Protestant Revolution, the Reformation and everything,
Hmm.
is when everybody could have in the Gutenberg Revolution, where you have people being able to have their own text in their home, there is an opportunity for an explosion of creativity inspired by the stories and parables and lessons of the Gospels, particularly
Yes.
the whole New Testament. That's very inspirational. It's very inspirational in the sense that it affects you consciously and subconsciously when you are able to gather your family around and read these stories, these powerful stories in with your family and come to your own interpretation. That will allow for a lot of innovative new ideas that may be good, but it'll also jumpstart a lot of uh, things in a direction that will create, you know, will create the possibility for coming up with erroneous ideas. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? So that when you have
Trade-offs.
what's that? Yeah, chaos.
Trade-offs. There's an advantage to the remote transmission of information, but there's also a downside to it. Yeah.
Yeah, when you have when the biblical text was only in one language and transmitted to a mostly illiterate group of people and transmitted only through the sacramental structure of the church. There's a kind of divvying up of the good stuff in a ladle form. You're ladling
Hmm.
the good stuff in a kind of limited form, which allows for the community of that church community that you're a part of to more effectively kind of enforce the mimetic, behaviors of being like Christ a little better than, again, if you're off in the village just kind of freestyling and trying to figure out your own interpretation of what's happening in these stories. It may allow for more insights to be gleaned than what the other scenario was technologically prior. But again, it may also open up the opportunity for more dangers that were not available
Hmm.
before.
Okay. We're getting coming up on almost an hour here. I do want to ask you about one more general area that goes along with what we've been talking about here. Um, Humanity used to just revel in real violence being done to people. The gladiator games, crucifixions, um, uh, war as glory, and we still have some of that. We're not only a Christ haunted society, we're also still a very primitive human haunted society. But I do see that we've in some rather refined ways, we've come up with ways to turn our primitive urges for violence and combat into something that can be uh, uh, actually uplifting. And of course, I'm talking about professional wrestling.
Yeah.
Uh, Tell us about what you are doing with pro wrestling, and what do you see in it as really an art form? Because I get the impression from what you've posted on your platforms about it and what you've spoken about it and your participation in it, that you see this as something more than just a shallow gimmick and entertainment. Tell us about what you're doing with pro wrestling, and is there any sort of connection that you see to uh, your knowledge of violence and of theater and performance and the ways to maybe redeem some of those primitive urges we have into something that's not so doggone real violence.
Well, I have, I'm looking and I'm studying and I'm learning what I can
Hmm.
to be an effective manager of wrestlers so that they can do what they do and I can do what I do,
Sure.
and so how that will, shake up in the end is yet to be seen, how it would
Hmm.
all play out. What I want to do, I have a message and I have some things that I want the world and the country to know and I want them to hear them. And one of the things that I've long had a desire to do is to sing
Ah,
and to sing the way people kind of used to sing, but maybe do it in a different way. But
okay.
sing with, I like, the classics, Johnny Cash, Frank Sinatra, Elvis.
Uh,
What's wrong with these icons? I'm tired of we live in such a kind of cliche, like little bit of a too cool for school mindset,
Hmm.
which is really just envy on account of lesser men who want to diminish these iconic names as, oh, well, that's kind of like too on the nose, or I don't know. I don't have the right word that they would use. Too mainstream, too played out. What the difference is that men used to sing like men back then. And now
Okay.
there's hardly anybody singing anything, much less with a melody, much less with art,
Hmm.
much less with any kind of something fresh or different. And so I've developed, lots of songs over the years, and I'll be hopefully given the opportunity uh, to be able to share those songs with people in front of live audiences in particular. And if wrestling uh, is a means to be able to do that, then that's a fantastic opportunity in and of itself.
All right. Now, what do the wrestlers you'll be managing thinking about that? Are they also going to need singing lessons, or is it enough for them to just be excellent grapplers there in the ring?
I think they should focus on being savage beasts. That's what they're there for, right?
All right.
They
Very
should
good.
be as savage as they possibly can to help people with their, desire for catharsis, right? Their desire
Sure.
to see somebody get torn up to pieces. That's their job. My job is to give people a little taste of class, a little bit of art for once in their lives. So maybe it's a matter of like, Mary Poppins, just a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. Although it's hard to know which one's the medicine and which one's the sugar here. But to me,
Sure.
if a population has gotten to the point in America where they don't understand art, they want to listen to music manufactured in some dark dungeon in the basement of some Hollywood millionaire, and they think that's music, then maybe they're going to have to take another means to be able to understand what good art sounds like again. And maybe that'll be done in wrestling arenas around this country.
Well, excellent. And as Ray Peat has taught us, perhaps a spoonful of sugar isn't as bad as it's made out to be.
Absolutely.
There.
Absolutely.
Well, very good, David. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about? I know you had a few topics that you definitely wanted to touch on here. Is there anything else that perhaps we broached a little bit during the conversation that you wanted to emphasize a little more?
Well, first of all, has Rene Girard lived up to the hype that I gave him for you so far?
I was not going into it with much expectation. I
Well,
knew
good.
you
I
were.
didn't hype it up too much, but I did. I did. I just wondered, was it worth your while?
Oh, it was definitely worth my while. He's an interesting thinker. His when I you brought up Jordan Peterson when we were talking earlier. When I first encountered Jordan Peterson, it was before all of the political stuff went crazy for him in Canada. So I just encountered him as a guy who was really giving psychological language to a lot of things that I was already thinking about and pursuing myself. And so I thought it was wonderful to get that new language. Rene Girard sort of does the same thing. His perspective as an anthropologist. So for that alone, it would have been worth it just to get the language of a new discipline approaching these very rich and deep uh, truths from that perspective. So from that alone, it would have been worth it. But it was also very fascinating for me to just to see Rene Girard dive into very deep uh, human issues in
Yeah,
ways that I hadn't quite seen before. So your recommendation was a welcome one when I finally got around to doing it.
good.
I didn't do it right away, but I it was
Yeah,
always in the back of my mind. And when someone finally brought it up to me again, I said, "Yeah, I had a wonderful opportunity to speak to this gentleman named David Gornoski, and yeah, he told me about Rene Girard, and so yeah, you perhaps planted the first seeds there, so that when the Girardian technology got to me later,
yeah.
some groundwork had been laid.
Good, good. Well, and when's the last time? When did we do that first discussion together on my show?
Over the winter, it was this calendar year, 2024, but it was winter time. Yeah,
Okay, so almost a year, I guess, almost, right?
yeah, it's the better part of a year at this point. Yeah,
Wow. Wow.
And
Time
I've been
flies.
keeping in touch with you, listening to your stuff on Spotify when I can, seeing you on X, the former Twitter, which I call Twixer, just to
Yeah.
combine the names. So I've been keeping in touch with your
Yeah.
work.
And you can
Um,
see probably how I'm linking Ray Peat when he emphasizes, and I know I'm kind of fast
mhm,
forward because I just gave a little introduction, but Ray's all about removing the stress molecules over, the excessive stress mechanism in your body being kind of your number. Like when you're relying on stress pathways, then you're going to be
mhm.
more irritable and more angry, more vicious, more authoritarian, more
Sure,
helpless, all the bad stuff that we don't like, right? And
sure.
you can see how if society has people who are all kind of having bodies that are overridden by stress,
Mm,
how that fits really nice with the scapegoat mechanism, doesn't it? Right? Because if we're all stressed out because of a famine or a lack of food or resources are limited or there's a plague, that can draw out that stress mechanism en masse and create an environment in which the scapegoat mechanism is unconsciously pulled to relieve everybody of their individual and collective stress, right? So
sure, sure. And another thing I gathered from Girard was part of the scapegoating that happened was, in one sense, people not wanting to face up to their own failures.
that's
So
right.
you dump it onto the scapegoat and
Yeah,
release the scapegoat, and it's gone. So it seems to me that maybe if people like Ray Peat and yourself, of course, spreading the message of Ray Peat's research, if we can get people to focus on, I can take more responsibility for my health,
yeah.
that will reduce the scapegoating tendency.
And specifically, if you can get your high thyroid up and get your T3 numbers up, which a lot of people don't, we are all
Hmm.
impaired in various ways if you're living in this environment. Uh, you can find that it's easier to forgive, right? And it's easier to be kind and gentle to people who are hateful to you. It's easier to have deep compassion. It's just all these spiritual principles that we're supposed to live, right? And I love this meme. The meme says it so well. I need to make it like my permanent image on one of my platforms. It's this little meme of somebody saying, "Oh, Jesus, what have you done with me? I mean, how much more can I handle? Like your afflictions and your trials and tribulations." And Jesus says, "Have you checked your thyroid?"
Ah, okay.
And it's like, dude, like how much of our spiritual, we're all going to have, we can, all face things that are just, no matter what you do, they're going to be extremely difficult. You can be stuck with a very violent person just coming home from the movie theater and in the alley. You can
Mhm.
have a horrific thing happen, God forbid, in a car accident or a family member
Yes.
or all kinds of things that are outside of our control. But uh, barring those things, being able to practice proper care of the human body physiologically bleeds into the spiritual disciplines being much more on easy mode rather than hard mode to
Mm.
practice every day. Isn't that great? So I think that's pretty cool to see how that all fits together. And I'm interested to map it all out even further. And we've only just started. So that's what I love about being a lifelong student and having what a blessing it is to be able to go on this learning journey with folks like you and others and our audience that give me great ideas, and I always like hearing from them. So you can email me hello@aneighborschoice.com and send me your feedback. Or also, I wanted to ask you, what's the name of you said you have wrestling podcast. What's the name of your podcast again?
It is Don't Bury the Lead, a wrestling channel, and the main channel. My buddy set it up on YouTube, so we're over on YouTube. And lead is Lead. We spell it the way it's supposed to be spelled, not the way those funny reporters tried to be cutesy with the Lede. So it's Don't Bury the Lead.
Well, at the risk of bearing the lead, what if you're a wrestling observer? What do you think is the most lacking in the modern product today, that like at a market opportunity? What do you think, what do you go back to? Or maybe you think the whole thing is just fine and it's better than it's ever been before as an industry. That if there's one thing that just screams out at you, man, if they could just get this part right, man, I would enjoy the product much more, what would it be?
I tend to be an outlier fan. I'm more of a fan of the classic pro wrestling,
Okay.
but Uh, the one issue I've noticed is that as some of these wrestling promotions get so huge, they have to satisfy such a variety of a fan base that their shows have to become a little bit of everything. So
Yeah.
I kind of watch it and I, I accept the stuff that I would normally fast forward through or could do without to get to the stuff that I like. Um I think there's maybe an opening for more all around wrestling and grappling in the sense of guys being defensive wrestlers, not just offensive wrestlers. A term that's thrown around sometimes is spot fest, where wrestling matches become just spot fest, where one guy does his move and then the other guy gets to do his move. And then
Yeah.
the first guy does his move, the second guy does his move. And you get a sense that there's, it's competing monologues rather than a dialogue,
Yeah.
and so I think the matches I enjoy the most are when guys wrestle defensively as well as offensively, because it gives you a sense that these guys really are, well, they're, first of all, they're skilled at twice as
Yeah.
much of wrestling. They're skilled at the defensive arts of grappling rather than just, well, I learned how to do this one move.
Yeah.
So maybe the all around wrestling where it's not just spot fest but also defensive wrestling, um, not just high flying spots, but also holds and reversals and roll ups, things like that. I The athleticism and the well roundedness, I think I enjoy the most,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure if there's a huge audience for that. I
Right.
don't like to use myself as a barometer for the audience in general because I've never been really in the Overton window.
Well, who's your favorite wrestler?
Right now, I really like L.A. Knight because
No,
my
of all
buddy and I.
time. Of all time.
Oh, of all time? Oh boy.
Dean Malenko?
Not so much Dean Malenko. I like Sting,
Okay.
Steve Borden, because I saw him through all of his iterations almost once he got to the NWA in the late '80s and early '90s. So I saw Surfer Sting, I saw sort of NWO Sting, the Crow Sting, and then later into his career as well. He was a guy in his heyday who could wrestle. He was one of the early high flyers for a big man, but he
Yeah.
had a power game. He could wrestle defensively. He could do holds. He could do reversals. He could do some traditional grappling. So he was a very well-rounded athlete just to watch, a ton of charisma, but it wasn't an empty charisma. He could go in the ring.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Dominic, it's been a wide ranging and great conversation. What's your
It has.
Substack?
Good neighbor, bad citizen. You can
Very
search
good.
for
What?
that over at Substack. I put out an article every Wednesday. The Wednesday wake up. It comes to you early in the morning, 6 a.m. Eastern time. And then I put out about a half hour podcast on Sundays called the Sunday Buffet, where I do the griddle of hot takes. I do the salad bar, a variety of fresh items I found from the week. And then we hit the omelet station, which is the highlight of any breakfast buffet. And the omelet station is our scripture study where we do it kind of in the vein of the anarchist voluntarist early church. So I tend to break a few eggs.
Oh, cool. Well, I appreciate you joining me today, and it's been great talking to you.
Great talk. Thank you, David.
Take care.